Welcome to Heads Up, the ISC Research series that keeps you informed of the latest trends happening in the international schools market. Let's get started with our episode.
Welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us for today's panel, where we're going to be discussing how governance can effectively support international school leaders. This session will draw upon some of the latest findings to address some of the challenges within the international school governance and discuss how governance could be improved. A report with the full research results will be available from ISC Research in October, so do keep an eye out for that. So without further ado, let me welcome our panel. Vanita Uppal, OBE, is the Director of the British School, New Delhi in India, an elected member of the IB Heads Council, member of the Executive Board of Phobicea, and a member of HMC. She's joining us from India today. Ian Hunt is CEO and Chairman of Haileybury, Kazakhstan, and was formerly CEO of Gabitas Educational Consultants, as well as a HMC member, and he joins us today. And David Axtell is an experienced consultant advising large international companies on insurance and risk management, and is a former parent governor and deputy chair of St. Christopher's School in Bahrain. Ian, I'll start the first question with you. The latest research that we've conducted suggests that international school boards and governing bodies are taking on responsibilities such as crisis and risk management, school community engagement, and school leader well-being. Has the board at Haileybury in Kazakhstan responded to similar contemporary challenges? And if so, how have you done so?
I think, firstly, it's really important to be very clear that school boards are not there to meddle in operational aspects and the day-to-day running of the school, but they are there to support the executive. My big question to anybody is, any board, is why would you invest such significant sums in your staff and then not ensure that they were supported? So I speak daily with our heads, try to ensure they have a cushion between themselves and the investors so that they can carry out their executive role in how we would consider a traditional UK head would expect to operate. And of course, giving them the tools to stay sane and safe and feel supported themselves. So that involves mentoring and listening and the physical resources like the right accommodation and clear understanding and agreement on what quality time means away from the role itself.
How has your board responded to the challenges of COVID in recent years? And more importantly, how has that directly impacted you as a school leader? How have you felt supported or otherwise? Vanita, if I could ask you to weigh in.
Ian picked up two things. One, of course, is the relationships and the connects that the governors, I see governors as permanent ambassadors of the school, and they're constantly building these relationships. And I think regardless of the jurisdiction you are in, it is about maintaining these relationships, because especially during COVID, we saw that it wasn't just, okay, I know so-and-so, but there was a relationship that you could count on and bank upon. So I think governors there play a critical ambassadorial role, and they have so in the last few years especially. I think our board has been amazingly proactive and extremely supportive. Ian talked about well-being. I think every meeting I have with the board, especially appraisal meetings, are not just about targets, they've actually put down my well-being as one of my targets because they think I don't pay enough attention to it. So I think that has been incredible. I think the board for me and for the SLT, they act as our critical friends. And they have been, and I think this is something that a lot of people get amazed by, is the amount of time our parent governors give to board work and school work. And we have been able to introduce transformational initiatives because there is that synergy of thought and action built on trust and open communication. So during the COVID pandemic, that has actually been strengthened rather than weakened. And I think we've come out much stronger as a board and as a school because of that very, should I say, a very happy partnership, which is based on critical friendship and not just acceptance or denial, but on critical friendship.
That point about trust is absolutely crucial. Ian, in your experience, do you think that boards are sufficiently prepared and equipped to take on this responsibility and these contemporary challenges? And is accreditation guiding your board, or where are you obtaining guidelines and professional development necessary to inform and develop the board?
I think that the first point that we all have to reiterate is that each board has to be fit for purpose. And that means that there's a range of skills on the board. And it goes back to Vanita's point about trust. It's not just trust between the executive and the board, but it's trust within the board as well, because board members will often call each other and ask questions. You're absolutely right in that there is a range of skills on the board, but not everybody understands schools from a teaching or an educational perspective. And in many ways, that's absolutely the right thing, because you don't want I couldn't think of anything worse than a school board full of teachers. And having been one myself in the past, I can say that. But it's about having that range of skills, because you've got to be challenging the executive, but also supporting them. And in order to challenge them, you've got to know what issues they're facing. First and foremost, I think you've got to be willing to train people within the board context yourselves. It's not just about sending them off on a course, although there are some decent courses available. I think one of the biggest challenges in boards is in international schools where there is a for-profit element and the board tends to be quite small. That possibly could be because investors wish to retain more of the authority and control over the process. But of course, by doing so, you then lay yourself open to a lack of those skill sets that people are talking about. And the demands that the executive has on the board and the board has on the executive means that a typical board should probably be between 10 and 12, if not more, good people who have that range of skills. So, it's absolutely critical that we've got educationalists on the board. It's absolutely critical that we've got local business people. And if we can, then everybody agrees on what that skill audit is going to be.
It's interesting that you say 10 to 12 people is perhaps optimum. Would you agree with that, Vanita?
One of the things we do that our prospective governors are able to attend board meetings as silent observers. So when the elections are coming up, we encourage them to come. We also do a huge training for them before they even volunteer. There's a question of liability, but I think there are many more positives. I know I have some industrialists on the board, and they've gone away from our board saying, I have introduced these systems in my organization because they're so robust. So I think it's a process of osmosis, and we all learn from each other. So I'm pretty happy with that in terms of the preparation. There can never be enough preparation, let's be honest. And I think that's the one distinction I'd like to make between the role of the executive and the board, that effective boards are futuristic. They are not looking at the now and now. They are looking at how are we going to remain viable 10 years, 20 years, 30 years down the line. And that is the main role of the board, to be future looking, yet supporting you now, but being future looking.
David, from your own experience supporting international school boards, what skills would you say are essential on an international school board? And do you think accreditation bodies and international school associations should provide some kind of a clear framework for board requirements?
With regards to board skills, I absolutely agree that it's important to have a range of relevant skills that can support the management. Because without having additional educational expertise, often the only visibility that the board has is through the head, and purely from a governance perspective, that's not a healthy position to be in. I think some schools would benefit from fundraising experts or project management. I think Ian also mentioned architects, careers advisors, and I think this is where an educationalist could support, but also local companies could provide some support. I've also been interested to read a certain amount of research, particularly coming from the States, that shows that diverse boards, so diversity with ethnicity, gender and age, produce the best results. And the more time you spend, the more you can give, but also the more you will get out, and the greater the relevance to the work that you do. It's important that you work in partnership and you share goals. And I think, given that in the UK, I understand that some independent schools are now advertising, looking for governors. I answer this part of the question saying, if you're lucky enough to be able to choose, then you're really looking for somebody who can exercise sound judgment, maintain confidentiality, have no conflicts of interest, or at least declare them every time they think that there's one that is becoming relevant. Somebody who's ethical and trustworthy. That's my utopia.
Ian, Vanita, is there anything that you would add there in terms of an industry that you would like to see always represented on a board, or indeed as part of the skills set? Would there be anything you would like to add?
I think it's an interesting one that we haven't perhaps just touched on, and I know Vanita has probably the most experience in this, and that's on parent governors. And I think that there needs to be a really clear distinction between a governor who is a parent and someone who sees them as the parent representative on a board. I think it's really important to have parent representation. I think that there is inevitably a balance, and of course in Vanita's school it's parent-led as a board, but in most boards there will probably be one or two parents who are governors, and the clarity that parent is not there to represent either their own or other people's personal interests for their own children is really important. And it's important for the rest of the parent body not to see them in that context as well, because that way they don't then have pressure placed upon them, and they don't see themselves in an unrealistic environment. But what a parent governor can do is take the heat out of some of that by having a conversation outside of the school, sometimes just on the phone or a quick messaging, which gives the bigger picture, which perhaps had the board not have access to that parent governor, then there wouldn't have been that ability to take the air out of the balloon, so to speak, and just let it smooth a little bit. And so often, there is the best governance is actually taking place outside of the board meetings, and where people are building not just the relationships with the formal organisations, but the community around them as well. So I think it's all about that collegiality and that common goal to make what everybody really wants, which is to make the school that you represent the best possible environment in which it can operate.
If we are to believe that an effective school experience for a child is built on a strong partnership between all the stakeholders, the students, the teachers, the parents, I think a parent governor plays a critical role in cementing that partnership. We are fortunate that we have a very strong sense of community in our school. So we also have the opportunity to co-opt parents as committee members. And that is largely down to the relationships, the openness that the board has established between itself and the parent body. So say, for example, we were referring to a building project, right? So we have around our table on the buildings working group, we had parents who were architects, who were environmentalists, who were good with air quality, who were, working with big infra firms, who were not governors, but who came into that group and they were co-opted. I think the fundamental thing is not that there shouldn't be dissent, okay, because dissent is the enemy of change. We know that. But there has to be that culture of respectful listening and an appreciation of divergent opinions. And I think that is one skill set, Nalini, for international school boards and the ones I've operated with. That's been, should I say, the cornerstone of success or failure. That if you're able to listen, because there are divergent views, different skill sets, people coming from different points of view. But for the sake of the school, if you keep that as your mantra, that it is, we want the best for every little Johnny, then that synergy of vision, right? So, but that also entails the ability to take on a divergent opinion, but with respect and appreciation. Many boards flounder on that, and many relationships between the executive and the board flounder on that. And I'm sure Ian has seen enough of those, that is what happens, right? And I think that is so critical. And when you're inducting governors into the board, that is the point we emphasize and overemphasize, that we don't want everyone to agree, but we agree to disagree respectfully and listen actively to each other. I think that's a critical skill for any effective board. So I think parent governors have played a phenomenal role in building that understanding between your decisions, which may not be popular. You're not here to win a popularity contest. You're going to do what's right. But I think they've been that excellent buffer for us, at least.
David, I'm going to loop back to you. I'd like to ask you what you thought you brought to your board. Certainly our recent research suggests that 40% of international schools don't have a parent governor on their school board. So speaking from your own experience, what did you bring to the table that perhaps somebody who didn't have children may not be able to represent?
A parent governor can bring a sort of a greater knowledge of what is happening within the school, and therefore context to some of the discussions that are happening. And there were a number of occasions when, as a parent governor, I was able to help the school management settle disputes with parents. And I wasn't necessarily telling the parents anything different to what the school had told them, but I think just hearing it from somebody different and somebody who could maybe empathise a little bit while giving the same message, I was able to support the management with some of the decisions that they had taken. But also, just to sort of track back a little bit there, I think the process of an election for a parent governor is quite healthy, because it encourages awareness and interest and transparency. It is really important with parent governors, and I think with teacher governors, that the parameters are set. It's important that they know what they're there to do, but equally important that they know what they're not there to do. I think through communication and education, which is two-way, and tracking back to sharing common goals, then the board and the management can work collaboratively as a team for the betterment of the students, the teachers, and all the stakeholders.
So I was listening to David then, and it just reminded me of something that we haven't touched upon, and that's the importance of the chair, because the chair, their role is obviously to hold the executive to account, but it's also to ensure that there is a fair amount of oxygen given to each member of the board's opinion, but equally to steer the direction of the board, whether it's on one particular topic or whether it's in the whole strategic plan, and to ensure that that's done in the most effective and efficient way. And I think you underestimate the qualities of a good chair at your peril if you know, and we've all, I'm sure, sat on boards or been a part of environments where perhaps there are people who you would have chosen not to have been a chair. Then you've served with people who have been superb ambassadors, you know, for that role. But I think that anybody who is who's considering this role in terms of governance, the chair plays a very important role in that.
The chair is obviously key in setting the tone of how the board operates, but each individual member, each individual officer has a very important contribution to make. So being as we've touched on parent governors, is there anything you want to add in terms of the importance of having a teacher on the governing body?
I think it's critical. We didn't have one initially when I started at the school, but over the last 15 years or so, we've had a teacher governor of the board. And I think as much as you do the induction for the governors, the teacher governor also has the same induction.
Right.
So you are not taking staff issues to the board. That's not the platform. You have a staff rep for that. But the board has benefited so much from hearing the point of view of somebody other than the principals who sit on the board and the head, a staff member who's saying, well, if you introduce this, I can tell you this is going to be hugely popular, or I can tell you it's going to be down a slippery slope. Because they're doing that as governors. So I think boards which keep teachers out, I think they do it at their own peril, honestly, because that is, you have so much wisdom in that. And of course, staff elect wisely. Staff know the distinction between a staff rep who meets me every 6 weeks and a governor on the board, because that same sense of confidentiality, trust, integrity, and even for teachers, Nalini, it's brilliant training, brilliant professional development.
That's a really interesting perspective there from Vanita, because there are different ways in which teachers can be represented on the board. One can be actually as governors themselves, and I think the point there about the wisdom that their fellow teachers have in choosing them is really important. And there are other elements of that where senior teachers can be co-opted into various different committees. Yes. Depending on what is being discussed, and you're absolutely right, Vanita. There is so much good CPD for a teacher to see that macro side of school life. Can I just pick up on one other thing as well, which I think is critical? I think it came up in the chat, and that is that whatever the skill set of the board, and unless they're teachers or unless they're educationalists, or unless they've worked in the specific element of this industry, one of the key training aspects of any board is in safeguarding, because it's not something that comes naturally to someone who perhaps is in industry and is not involved with children. And yet when they come onto the board, it is a critical element of it, because as we all know, in any inspection, if you fail the safeguarding element of it, that could potentially fail the school. You don't get notice to improve, you just get closed down. So it's really important that all the board members are completely and utterly aware that of the importance of safeguarding, and we expect all of our board members to have completed level 3 safeguarding training, which is probably a little bit higher than the minimum requirement, but we see it as such an important aspect of it. Safeguarding is an annual commitment, and if you want to stay up to date on it, you have to ensure that your training is annual, because things change annually.
Safeguarding is contextual because local laws are different, and we have to remember that. But in our school, what we do is we get our legal team it's a mandatory training for every governor. You might have heard it 3 times before, I don't care. You're sitting around the table and listening to it again. And we also have a safeguarding governor who's responsible on the board. And the other aspect, Ian, if I'm sure you're looking at that, is also what's safer recruitment. And at Phobos here, I lead the board on safeguarding. And one of the things we've really made huge, headway in is safer recruitment guidelines. So that role of the governors is just so critical. And I couldn't agree more with Ian that is the most important thing that they do.
How can you ensure that governors from an international context are inducted effectively and they feel sufficiently confident in areas such as safeguarding and academic decisions? I'd like to add to that, obviously, training is essential for any member of a board, whether it's the chair, an officer, teacher, parent, whatever the representation is. How do you perhaps go about doing that at your school? How do you ensure that all these people are of value to the school, are supporting the school leaders, the senior executive team, in that way? David, I'll come to you first, and then Ian and Vanita, if I could ask you to weigh in afterwards.
The vast majority have no educational experience or background, and as a result of that, the new board member will be very aware of that. And I think it's almost impossible to bring somebody up to speed immediately. And I think that's where understanding of, or the understanding from other board members and the support of other board members is vital, but perhaps more so communication with the management. Ultimately, it's the school management that are the experts, and it's imperative that they take responsibility, I think, in helping the new board members achieve a level of confidence. I think regular training, regular communication, regular access to the school and to teachers, and the ability, as Ian said, to talk offsite. And I think to liaise with educational experts that are on the board. I think the more you can put into it, the more you will get out of it. And the sooner you achieve a level of confidence, the sooner you can contribute.
One of the things that we've introduced, and that's been very beneficial, is attaching buddies to new governors. So every governor has a buddy governor who's been in the system for longer than the newly elected governor. And that is going to lead to something like succession planning and continuity, which I think is critical in elected boards. And I think that's really helped. And regular training, of course, and regular updates from the senior leadership team and access to that training material. I think that, but adding the buddy system has really, really been very helpful. And one-on-one training sessions, which I lead when a new governor comes on board. And I spend a substantial amount of time on this aspect with them, as well as the chair.
So I think one of the things that we've done is to invite the board to come in for a day and to see the school in operation in the classroom and watch classes, watch the pupils move around, watch the teachers and how they operate, and you get a much closer and clearer understanding of the inner workings of the school and actually the soul of the school. Because the old traditional view that a board member turns up 3 times a year, has a meeting, then has a good dinner, has gone long time ago. And effective boards, really do need to understand the organisation, and they need to have a feel for actually what they're governing.
But just as we end, I'd like to put a question to all of you, really. In our research in 2018, we found that 63% of the respondents stated that they self-evaluate. So boards who were self-evaluating their success, with 14% saying that they didn't have any assessment process in place at all. I'll start with you, Vanita, as a school leader. How would you recommend that boards evaluate themselves?
So I think, as far as I'm concerned, I think it's about organizational culture of review, critical feedback to self, and improvement. There's no point in a review if there is no improvement, right? And you have to be able to look yourself in the mirror and say, this really is not working. And that ability I think that is what comes with a culture of trust and transparency. Otherwise, you can evaluate anything, you can get any certificate you want, Nalini, but it will not move the board or the school further forward.
All right, David, you've been on the other side. You've been a board member rather. What are your recommendations for how school boards evaluate themselves?
I think boards expect transparency and accountability from management. So with a view to sort of a holistic 360-degree approach, boards should also expect accountability and transparency for their actions. both individually, potentially, and collectively. Education is one of the most important global industries that there is. And therefore, to have little transparency over governance is frankly shocking. And to have board members who say, we need to do more, and to have head teachers who can say, I've got no idea how my board achieved an outstanding on that, it shows that something more needs to be done.
Ian, let me come to you. Any additional thoughts on how international school boards can perhaps benefit from either internal or external evaluation?
I think, first of all, there is nothing wrong with an external evaluation. I think but that has to come hand in glove with a continued internal self-evaluation, as Vanita said. And the final point, I think, is that we started off with the concept of crisis management. If you don't reflect on how well you did and to look yourself in the mirror and say, could we have done better, then you're not better prepared for the next time.
Huge thanks to our esteemed panelists today, Vanita, Ian, David. Thank you all so much for sharing your experiences, your insights so generously.
To find out more about governance practices in international schools, the latest free specialist report is available to download now from the ISC Research website at iscresearch.com/intelligence. For more information about Heads Up, including access to previous episodes, please visit iscforschools.com/headsup. Until next time.